Go.
G major.
There are few violin teachers as intriguing, unique, and impactful as Ivan Galamian. Through decades of teaching out of his studio on the Upper West Side of New York City, and by founding the Meadowmount School in upstate New York, Galamian formed some of the world's most renowned violinists and is now regarded as the greatest violin teacher of the 20th century. His students have gone on to become masters themselves. Pinchas Zukerman, Itzhak Perlman, Kyunghwa Chung, Michael Rabin,
I can tell you that there is no such thing as a Galamian student who doesn't know how to play the violin. Some will be maybe more gifted, more expressive, more this, more that, but everybody knows how to do it.
When you look at the students he had, people like Rabin and Perlman and Zuckerman and the others, I guess he thought he could do more as a teacher of those kind of students than he would ever do just as a player.
So when Galamian moved from Moscow to Paris in 1922 and took lessons from Lucien Capet, he entered a legacy of violin pedagogy that grew exponentially under his watch and will continue to grow for generations to come. Ivan Galamian was born in 1903 in modern-day Iran, but moved to Moscow at the age of 2. There, Galamian quickly learned the fundamentals of playing the violin through the Russian school and tradition. He studied with Konstantin Mostras, a student of the famed Leopold Auer. Political turmoil forced Galamian out of Russia in 1922, and he moved to Paris to study with Lucien Capet. It was there Galamian's name was written into a pedagogical legacy stretching all the way back to the Baroque era. He only gave a handful of public concerts, all of which garnered high praise in local newspapers. But by 1930, he would commit to becoming a teacher and did not perform publicly again.
As the story goes, he somehow was figuring out that he wanted to be a teacher and he wanted to be a very successful teacher. He was very, very ambitious. And he didn't think that was really compatible with the pursuit of a career as a solo violinist.
And so Galamian moved again, this time to New York, where he eventually joined the faculties of the Juilliard School and the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, teaching students from both schools out of his Manhattan apartment. Galamian also founded the Meadowmount School in upstate New York, a summer retreat where students could go for more intense training on their instruments from the world's best teachers.
It's sort of hard to describe. It's not really competitive because it's not like you get up and compete with each other, but you just hear people around you and you think, how's that happening? How's that person playing like that? Well, there was no question he was the greatest violin teacher, certainly in the United States and probably in the world at that point.
It really was a place where you did your scales and you practiced your double stops. It doesn't mean that we didn't do repertoire, because we did various concerti. But it really was focused on learning how best to play and to get without any distractions. And what does that mean? It means that we didn't have other classes to worry about. The focus was practice and lessons and chamber music and learning as much as possible.
He was a very gentle person. I never heard him raise his voice for anything. But he drove a very old Thunderbird around the campus, and at some point every day, the Thunderbird would come down the path, and we'd all scurry to get back into our room to practice.
Masters of the violin in their time, like Corelli, Baillot, Marsic, and many others, are Galamian's direct ancestors in this pedagogical family tree. With his background in French tradition and Russian influence, Galamian's teaching brought significant advances to violin technique that prepared players for music of the 20th century.
From what I can tell from what the training would have been like in the 20s in Paris, it was a mixture of kind of French elegance and very much a backward-looking thing at the styles of previous generations. If you look at like Baillot and Kreutzer, and there are some surviving drawings of their playing, and you can see there's a kind of stiffness to the way the bow arm works in those, and clearly he had to have been trained initially in that, and I think he objected to anything that was stiff.
He covered all of what needed to be covered in the 20th century and a little bit beyond. And so I think you will have the dexterity and the skill to assimilate and to learn.
One major difference was in bow grip. Russian tradition called for a massive slant in the bow hand with the wrist raised high to produce large volumes of sound. Keep an eye on Jascha Heifetz's bow hand in this recording of Wieniawski's Polonaise No. 1 in D major. His hand is extremely pronated, fingers are close together, and that wrist is way up in the air. Here's Galamian student Pinkas Zuckerman playing the same piece with the Franco-Belgian bow hold. Zuckerman has much more flexibility and less tension in his wrist.
The squared knuckles here it's kind of hard to teach. And that's what enables this very, very flexible bow change. Because I keep my index finger closer together with the other fingers. Whereas you see some of the Galamian students really have the index finger is very separated. Mm-hmm. I never was comfortable with that. And I think it's because I had originally gotten really used to playing in something close to nearly the old Russian school.
Yes.
With a high arm and the fingers kind of close together and very slanted. It allowed me to produce a really large tone. And I liked it and didn't know any better. And I think he just wound up accepting it and not overly. I mean, he mentioned this extending the index finger a few times in the first few months. Well, pretty insistently in the first few months, and then he just kind of started to leave me alone.
But this story also reveals that Galamian didn't believe in a one-size-fits-all approach, that with the proper technique, every violinist could round the edges and adapt to a playing style that removed tension and was most comfortable for them. One of Galamian's lasting contributions to the string world is his 1962 book entitled Principles of Violin Playing and Teaching, which Professor Seike referred to earlier. In the book, Galamian outlines the fundamentals of his pedagogical style and his combination of French and Russian traditions. This was also one of the first pedagogical books to contain photographs, which have helped the book become a definitive volume that continues to be used as a building block today. Galamian stresses the importance of natural motion in playing as he writes, "The key to facility and accuracy, and ultimately to complete mastery of violin technique, is to be found in the relationship of mind to muscles, that is, in the ability to make the sequence of mental command and physical response as quick and as precise as possible."
What comes to mind is the fact that those words sound rather dry. And nothing that he taught people ever sounded like that, although the final result was precisely that.
Yeah.
That's what comes to mind. Mm-hmm. There were books about the physiology of violin playing, actually, that were Russian from the 50s. I tell you, I opened the book, looked at some of the graphs when I was in my 20s, and I said, he knew all of that. But he did not really present the information in that way.
So Galamian's kind of contribution to this legacy of violin pedagogy that goes all the way back is basically accelerating that transition from the rigidity that was to a more flexible, natural position that allowed for, I think, more expressive playing, but then also would allow you to play longer into life.
Absolutely true.
So he wanted everything fluid, everything very lyric. The setup was all designed to be very efficient. a very low elbow, so that you're doing as much as possible with weight rather than with pressure. Fingerings were chosen to be fast and convenient.
So what were lessons with Galamian like? There are only a few hours of videotaped Galamian lessons, all filmed with young children at Meadowmount in the summer of 1980.
Where your hand should be always before the wrist. Never the wrist would go down. Show me how it's wrong to play. Ah? And if you look at in the mirror on you, you will see it's very ugly. And you know, in violin playing, everything what looks pretty is good. Everything what looks ugly is bad.
This lesson is with a young Joshua Bell, a very well-known violinist today. Keep in mind how little Galamian says to him to fix a problem, and how much less he must have said to older students.
You see this note? Tar, tar, mark them more. Hop, hop, hop.
So while these recordings are insightful, his students are the only ones who can truly convey what happened at lessons in New York.
I think I watched that video from Meadowmount, and I thought, really? Is that what went on in lessons? And it sounded very familiar to me, but on the other hand, I thought, well, what did I actually get out of the lessons with him? Because he doesn't really say anything. You know, there's a certain discipline that goes on, and so I got very concerned, and I started, anytime I was somewhere on tour with somebody I knew had worked with him, I'd say, well, what was your experience of working with Galamian? And everybody gave a completely different response. It was like he was a different person for each student.
Some of my friends that I made who were studying with him in the first few weeks were telling me exactly what was going to happen at the first lesson. He's going to say this, and he's going to assign that, and all of it. And so when I came back after my first lesson, they, okay, how did it go? Did he give you Kreutzer number 2? I said, no. Did he tell you to do the scale in this way or that way? I said, no. Well, what then? And I said, I guess the goal must be he must have some different things in mind. And he had assigned different repertory and different etudes.
And that's a miracle. Not only to be able to sit there all those hours, but to essentially put on a different personality depending on who. I mean, I know students for whom he was a terror. I mean, he was just really, really brutal discipline. And others for whom he barely said anything about violin and mostly was just supportive and kind of a parent figure. After my first lesson, I guess at Meadowmount, he said, you know, there are many good things about your playing, but there are many bad things. And I'm not interested in the good things, so we won't talk about those. And he never said a complimentary thing to me for the next 4 years.
Wow.
So, and that was very much on purpose. You know, that's the way he worked.
There's probably no recording of Galamian playing. If there is, I would be sorry to know about it, because it would almost denigrate his greatness. He did demonstrate on rare occasions, and it would be perfectly clear what he wanted to show you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only reason he would pick up the violin. He would really show you exactly how something basically should look, because it wouldn't be how it should sound.
It was always there, the instrument, and he would say, okay, you know, lower, I don't know, slower vibrato, and then he would play one note. Mm-hmm. But he would never really play a half a page or something. Mm-hmm. It was more detailed than that.
He must have been a hell of a violinist.
Yeah.
You know, but maybe something wasn't all the way there. I mean, he wasn't disdainful or anything, but it was just, and you know what? I appreciate it. I got a rigorous, no nonsense 55-minute lesson every time. There's no chit chat, no wasting of time.
It's important to note that not all of Galamian's rules were the same for everyone. It really depends on who you talk to. Some things were givens, like the prompt on-the-hour start times and 55-minute duration, his choice use of words, and his choice to only teach in his studios inside his apartment or at Meadowmount. But despite this, all of his students individually got something from his lessons that has helped them pencil their name in on the pedagogical family tree.
His apartment was really a world of its own. Everybody that was there was a violinist. You were all somehow on an equal footing. There was no sense of I'm a junior, I'm a senior, I'm at Curtis, I'm at Juilliard, I'm at NEC, I'm at nowhere, whatever it is, or I'm at Moscow Conservatory, or whatever these things were. You just didn't know. There was no recognition of that at all. It was the Galamian studio, and it existed in a world of its own.
The expectation during lessons, both at home and also in Meadowmount, was that there was a warm-up room. And you were supposed to be there half hour before your lesson. And you would think that with all those glass doors and he teaching the person before you, that he wouldn't know exactly when you arrived. The front door was open in the apartment. He knew precisely when you arrived. And then sometimes he would mumble, oh, we're a little bit late today.
In my first year, I was clean and everything, but I dressed casually for probably 2 lessons. And in about the 3rd lesson, he gave me the lecture about, he looks at me and he says, every day I shave my face, I put on my suit and my tie for you. And look at you. And I just, I'm just like freaking out. I'm like, Mr. Galamian, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I will. And from that day onward, I wore a suit and tie for every lesson. I overdressed even in comparison to the other students. I just wore my concert clothes for every single lesson. For the rest of the time. And I think it still didn't persuade him that my character was good enough.
You could spend hours with any Galamian student hearing stories of their time with the great pedagogue, but it's clear that from his school came a new wave of violinists, now deep into their career, but all still learning from the master, even more than 40 years after his death.
Considering that he probably worked with 100 students every year over 40 years.
That's
a lot of students.
Just thinking about the audience for people who may be watching this, current students, and then maybe students of your students in the future, what do they kind of need to know as they enter into this legacy of violin pedagogy?
You can correct, you can be demanding, you can instruct, but always in a constructive and positive way.
Yes.
And the point with little kids is to have them look forward to come to a lesson. If not, then what's the point?
Yeah.
And I think I have some students who have really learned that. That they create an atmosphere that is supportive and maybe fun for younger students, but they're not letting anything go by.